Directly above my head right now is a deep space object called the California Nebula. It sits right here in between the star Capella and the Pleiades. Now, this object is almost invisible to the human eye, even with big telescopes. But a telescope and camera can see what our eyes can't. So I'm going to point my telescope there, photographing this object for 1 hour, 10 hours, all the way up to 100 hours to see just what kind of detail is in this region of space. Now, even though I have a degree in astrophysics and I've been photographing space for a long time, believe it or not, I've never actually taken a good photo of this nebula. And there's a reason why I need so much exposure time. This object is so faint that even after the telescope was invented, it still went unnoticed for a long time. But in 1885, an astronomer named Edward Barnard was hunting for a comet. In his search, he noticed something very faint that was never seen before. He later took a photo and gave us our first image of the California Nebula, named because it looks like California. Now, the longer you photograph an object, the more detail you can see. Barnard used a 6-inch telescope and 6 hours of exposure to get his photo. But with modern technology, we can see more in 5 minutes than he could with a 6-hour photo. This is my 5-minute photo I took of the California Nebula. If we compare the results, we can see why he would have marveled at how far astrophotography has come. The details in the main part of the nebula are more pronounced, and the faint extended regions that are invisible in his photo start to hint that there's more to be seen. But I will say, there is something magical about his result. In a way, he was really lucky. Back then, space was talked about with excitement and discovery. But today, space is often talked about using words that generate fear. Take the sun, for example. We're currently in solar maximum, which means the sun has been sending out a lot of solar flares. So when you see headlines like this, how can you tell what you're seeing is actual science-backed information? That's where Ground News comes in, the sponsor I really enjoy working with. I've been using Ground News before they even reached out to me. I like how I can see 69 news sources covered this recent solar flare, with 84% of those news sources having high factuality ratings. Plus, I can compare headlines from different sources. For example, ABC News says, "Sun releases 4 strong solar flares. What to expect," and has very high factuality, where the New York Post says, "The sun just spewed its biggest solar flare in 30 years. Here's what that could mean for us on Earth," but with mixed factuality. From that, I know which outlet would be a more reliable source to learn from. I also like Ground News' bias comparison tool, which gives me insights on how media outlets from each side of the political spectrum cover the story. It's data-driven tools like this from Ground News that makes keeping up with the news a lot easier. So if you head to the link in the video description below, ground.news/IanAstro, or scan this QR code right here, you'll get 40% off of their Vantage plan, which is the plan that I use. And now let's come back to the California Nebula to see what it looks like when I photograph it for more than 5 minutes. The black and white photos are pretty neat, but let's add some color and give this photo some life. With my telescope, astronomy camera, and specialized filters, here's what a 1-hour result looks like. Now we're starting to get some color in this nebula, but remember, this is a really faint object, and more time is going to be needed to make the colors pop. So let's double that exposure time and see what we get. Instead of a 1-hour photo, now we have 2 hours worth of exposure time. We can really see the colors start to come out more. But the question that always comes up is, are these colors even real? The answer is no, but not in the way that you think. Let me explain. It all comes down to this: how we filter light. Think of your smartphone camera. It uses red, green, and blue filters to mimic how our eyes see the world. But with these photos, I'm not trying to mimic what our eyes see. I'm looking at the chemical makeup of this nebula. The problem is that in deep space, 2 common gases, hydrogen and sulfur, both emit red light. This right here is an image I captured of the California Nebula in what we call true color, what your eyes would see if you could expose for really long periods of time. It's extremely red. There's hydrogen and sulfur in there, but I can't tell where one begins and one ends. So to uncover the hidden structure of the nebula, I capture the gases separately using special filters, and then I shift the colors to force them apart. Using a sulfur filter, I take that data and turn it into a red color. Then I take the hydrogen and I turn it into a green color. And then I use a third filter, which looks for oxygen, and I turn it into the color blue. So is this what your eyes would see? No. But does that make it fake? Also no. The shape and structure you see is real. That's actually out there in the universe. It's a technique called false color imaging. It gives us clues about the astrophysics of the universe. And let's be honest, it makes the pictures look a whole lot better. But why am I capturing hydrogen, sulfur, and oxygen? Why not something like helium? Well, the reason, in my opinion, is way cooler than to just get a really pretty picture. And we can see why in the 10-hour result. With a 1-hour photo, we're just starting to see the separation of these gases. But when I expose for 10 hours, the true extent of where these elements lie are revealed. This is the result of combining multiple 5-minute images together and stacking them, totaling 10 hours. The blue color from oxygen is now really visible. The abundance of red sulfur hugs the edge of the object, and we can see the yellow in the center, caused by a mix of hydrogen and sulfur. The structure of this nebula is much more defined, showing off details that were missing in the 1-hour image. But this is more than just a pretty picture. These specific elements tell a story of what's happening in this tiny patch of the universe. You see, hydrogen, sulfur, and oxygen aren't random choices that I picked. When a star blasts radiation into interstellar gas and dust, it makes them glow at precise wavelengths. By isolating these 3 elements, we can decode what's really happening. First, we have hydrogen. It's the most abundant stuff in the universe. It tells us where most of the material is concentrated. Next is sulfur. This is what we call shocked gas. It reveals the edges of the nebula, shock waves where material is being slammed into each other. And finally, there's oxygen. Oxygen only glows when it's being cooked by intense, high-energy radiation. When you see it, you know you're looking at the hottest, most energetic regions of the nebula. When you combine them, you get more than just a pretty picture. You get a story of what's going on in the California Nebula. Now, if these colors look familiar to you, it's because it's the famous Hubble palette color scheme. It's the same exact recipe astronomer Jeff Hester used to give us that iconic Hubble image of the pillars of creation. Now let's see what happens when I double my exposure time, going from 10 hours to 20 hours. While there's some details that look a little bit more defined, honestly, there's not much difference here. So why would I spend so much time and effort going to 100 hours? Well, first, I've never photographed an object for 100 hours, so I wanted to see what would happen. But the scientific reason is the signal-to-noise ratio. Signal is the light and detail from the nebula. Noise is all the stuff that makes images look grainy, the stuff I don't want. To put it simply, if I shoot for longer, I get more detail and less noise in the image. The problem is, astrophotography follows the law of diminishing returns. Going from 1 hour to 10 hours makes the image 3 times cleaner, but going from 10 hours to 20 only gives me a 1.4x improvement. So if I want to double the quality of that 20-hour image, I have to go all the way to 100 hours. So I thought to myself, what things would be revealed that are invisible in 20 hours? So I started my journey capturing multiple 5-minute photos over and over again to stack them together to create a 100-hour image. Now, obviously, there isn't 100 hours in a single night. So to do this, I had to capture photos over multiple nights. This project actually took me 2 months to do. That's because anytime there were clouds, I had to stop. If the moon was out, I couldn't capture that faint oxygen nebula. It would just get washed out by the moon glow. In fact, if the moon was too close to this nebula, I couldn't shoot it at all. The moon glow would wash everything out. But eventually, I did it. And after all that time of planning, capturing, and processing this image, I finally got a 100-hour result. We started back in the 1800s with Barnard's image of the California Nebula, hinting that something was there. With my modern setup, we saw just how intricate these details were with a simple 5-minute exposure. And now, with 100 hours of light captured, we get to see this. This is what the California Nebula looks like when you photograph it for 100 hours. Features become stronger, more intense, more defined. These dark patches you see are clumps of cold gas and dust, blocking light from the nebula behind it. In the 1-hour photo, there's something hidden in the noise, and barely visible in the 20-hour photo. But with 100 hours, it becomes obvious. Distant galaxies buried in the background of the image. Those faint smudges are entire island universes, likely hiding their own version of the California Nebula deep inside. But the real story of what's happening is in the red and blue colors, because the California Nebula is an example of how massive stars influence the space around them. This star is the reason why we can see the California Nebula. This star right here is Menkib, one of the hottest stars you can see with your eye, with a temperature of a whopping 63,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's pumping out intense UV radiation, heating up those three elements and making them glow, illuminating this little pocket of the universe. Look at this sharp red edge, the sulfur. This is a wall of dense, pre-existing gas. When Menkib's light hits that wall, it lights up the texture of the terrain. This is shocked gas. You're looking at physical cliffs in space, light years tall, revealed by the light from Menkib. And then there's that beautiful blue oxygen. It's showing us where the radiation is most intense, which is why we only see that blue color near Menkib. When we look out into the universe with our eyes, it's easy to think that it's nothing but empty space between stars and galaxies. But this image shows us the invisible universe that's hidden from plain sight. Complex interactions of stellar winds and colliding gases, all happening 1,000 light years away from us in this small corner of the universe. The vast emptiness of space isn't as empty as you think.